The monastery sat in silence. Not the peaceful silence of prayer, but the heavy silence that comes before burial. 7 monks huddled in near darkness, their breath turning to white frost in the dim glow of a single butter lamp. Outside, 4 meters of compacted snow and ice had sealed every entrance shut. Inside, the temperature had dropped to -15 Celsius, and the ancient stone walls, 3 centuries old, were now slick with a thin coat of crystalline ice. Dorje, 80 years old, leaned against the altar with his weathered hands folded in his lap. His fingers were gnarled and spotted with age. He wasn't praying anymore. He was remembering something from 3 weeks ago. A blizzard at -42 degrees. A small snow leopard cub stranded on a frozen branch, looking directly into his eyes as he reached out through the storm. In the moment their gazes locked, human and animal, his hand extended toward her through the swirling white chaos. And later, those same golden eyes, the mother's, watching from the shadows before she turned and vanished into the white wilderness with her cub. The other monks didn't know what was playing through his mind. They didn't know about that moment on the mountain, about the trust in that tiny creature's eyes, about the long, deliberate look the mother had given him. In a few minutes, you'll understand why a wild snow leopard remembered an old man's face, and what she did when she heard 7 voices calling for help beneath the ice. But if you want more stories that remind you the world is stranger and more connected than we realized, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming. 3 weeks earlier, the winter was just beginning its descent on the Himalayas. The Karnak Monastery clung to the mountainside at nearly 5,000 meters, a cluster of whitewashed stone buildings perched where earth meets sky. For 9 months each year, 7 monks called it home. During the other 3 months, it became their fortress against the mountain's fury. Dorje had walked the meditation path every dawn for 62 years. His knees ached now, and his spine curved like the mountain itself, but his feet knew every stone by memory. The younger monks always offered to walk with him. He always refused. On the morning the blizzard came, the sky held a strange copper color. Wind rolled down from the north, carrying the smell of something ancient and cold. Dorje had just completed his first circuit when the snow began falling. Within minutes, the world disappeared. He turned back toward the monastery, but the wind had already erased all landmarks. White above, white below, white in every direction. The temperature was plummeting fast, -30, -35. The kind of cold that turns your breath to ice crystals before they leave your lungs. Dorje knew he was dying. Maybe not today, but soon. 80 years in this body. He'd made his peace with that. Then he heard something. A cry. High-pitched, not wind, not human. He stopped, his robe whipping around him in the storm. The sound came again, weaker this time, somewhere to his left. Every rational thought told him to keep moving, to find shelter, to survive. But 62 years of Buddhist practice had trained him to recognize suffering in any form, and this was suffering. He pushed forward through the blizzard, he following the sound. Through the swirling white chaos, he saw the twisted shape of an ancient pine tree clinging to the mountainside, its branches heavy with fresh snow. And there, on a low branch barely 2 meters off the ground, was the cub. She must have climbed there seeking shelter from the wind, but now she was trapped, too young to know how to climb down safely in the storm, too cold to try, her small body shaking violently against the snow-laden branch. The cub was looking directly at him, not the glazed stare of a dying animal, but alert, frightened, cold, desperate but conscious. A snow leopard cub, no more than 8 or 9 weeks old. Her blue-gray eyes locked onto his through the swirling white chaos. Her paws gripped the branch weakly, and she made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. Dorje looked around quickly for the mother. Nothing. Just white fury in every direction. The storm must have separated them. He moved closer to the tree, his robe thrashing in the wind. The cub watched him, that piercing gaze holding his, as if trying to understand whether this strange creature was threat or salvation. Dorje slowly reached out his hand. The wind tore at his robes. Snow stung his face like tiny knives. His arm stretched toward her through the storm, fingers extended, palm open. The cold bit into his exposed hand, already turning his skin red, then white. For a moment that felt frozen in time, they looked at each other, man and animal, 80 years and 8 weeks. His weathered hand reaching through the blizzard toward her small form clinging to the branch. Two beings caught in the same storm, separated by nothing but empty air and a question of trust. The cub didn't pull back. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes never leaving his face. Then Dorje moved the final distance. He reached up and carefully, gently, lifted her from the branch. Her fur was thick but soaked through, ice crystals clinging to her coat. She didn't fight. As his hands closed around her small body, she pressed into the warmth, instinctively seeking what her mother's body would have provided. Dorje pulled her close to his chest, shielding her from the wind. He could feel her rapid heartbeat, too fast, too frantic. He removed his outer robe with his free hand, fumbling with the fabric in the brutal cold. The wind slammed into him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his chest. He wrapped the robe around both of them, tucking the cub against his body beneath the wool, one hand cradling her small head. She looked up at him one more time, those blue-gray eyes wide and trusting, before pressing her face into the warmth of his chest. The climb back toward the monastery was the longest walk of his life. His vision darkened at the edges, his legs moved by memory alone. He couldn't feel his fingers anymore. The cub's weight was almost nothing, but it felt like carrying the mountain itself. The monastery appeared through the snow like a ghost, and he reached the door just as his vision tunneled to a pinpoint of darkness. His knees buckled. The last thing he remembered was the warmth of the cub pressed against his chest, her heartbeat still racing against his, and the distant sound of younger monks shouting his name. When Dorje opened his eyes, he was lying beside the fire with 6 worried faces hovering above him. In the corner, wrapped in blankets and drinking yak butter tea from a bowl, the snow leopard cub blinked at him with those same blue-gray eyes. She remembered him. He could tell. For 2 days, Dorje nursed the cub by the fire. He fed her warm butter tea from his fingertips, small pieces of dried yak meat softened in broth. The cub was female, her spots still faint beneath the thick fur. She cried less on the 2nd day. By the 3rd, she was trying to stand on those oversized paws built for walking on snow. The younger monks had never seen a snow leopard up close. They took turns watching her, marveling at her features. Karma, the youngest, wanted to name her. Sonam suggested building an enclosure, raising her at the monastery where she'd be safe from the harsh mountain winters. Dorje said nothing, but his eyes kept drifting to the window. On the 4th morning, he found the tracks, fresh paw prints in the snow circling the monastery's entire perimeter. Large prints, adult, the stride pattern of a female hunting. He followed them to the eastern wall where they stopped beneath a narrow window. The snow there was compressed, packed down by weight. she'd been sitting there, watching. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the peaks and the world turned deep blue, Dorji saw her. She stood on an outcrop 50 meters away, perfectly still except for the tip of her tail. Her coat was pale gray marked with dark rosettes, and her eyes caught the last of the light, reflecting gold. She didn't move. Neither did he. The moment lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then she was gone, melting back into the rocks. The other monks wanted to keep the cub. They argued gently, respectfully, but with real conviction. The wild was too harsh. The mother might be dead or unable to care for her. The cub would have a better life here, fed and protected. Dorje listened to them all. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but final. The cub belonged to the mountain, not to them. Her mother was out there. Her mother was suffering. Before dawn on the 5th day, Dorji wrapped the cub in a blanket and carried her outside alone while the other monks still slept. The air was sharp and clear, the kind of cold that makes the stars look close enough to touch. He walked 20 meters from the entrance and set the cub down in the snow. She looked up at him, confused, making a small chirping sound. Their eyes met again, the same recognition from that moment in the storm when he'd reached for her on the frozen branch.
Do you remember me?
Dorje stepped back,
So brave in the storm.
then back again. He kept his eyes lowered, his posture non-threatening. The mother appeared from the darkness. She approached slowly with her belly low to the ground, eyes fixed on the cub. When she reached her, she sniffed thoroughly, checking for injury, for wrongness. The cub mewed and pressed against her. The mother picked up her cub by the scruff the way cats have carried their young for millions of years. But before she turned to leave, she did something Dorje would remember for the rest of his life. She looked directly at him, not a glance, a look, deliberate, held for 3 full breaths, the same intensity her cub had shown in the storm. And then she carried her cub into the pre-dawn darkness. Dorje stood alone in the snow, watching the place where she'd vanished, feeling something settle in his chest. Connection, maybe. Recognition. He didn't have a word for it. He wouldn't see those golden eyes again for 3 weeks. And when he did, 6 other lives would depend on what she might or might not remember. 3 weeks passed, and winter tightened its grip on the Himalayas. The monastery settled into its cold season rhythm. Morning prayers at 4. Meditation. Simple meals of barley and tea. The younger monks studied scriptures by firelight while wind howled against stone walls that had stood for 300 years. Dorje returned to his meditation path, though he walked it more slowly now. The rescue had taken something from him. His fingers still ached where the cold had bitten deepest. But he walked anyway, because the path was what he knew. On the 23rd day after releasing the cub, the snow began falling again, heavy, relentless snow that accumulated faster than it could settle. By midday, half a meter blanketed the monastery roof. By afternoon, the peaks above had disappeared beneath fresh white weight. Sonam noticed it first, the way the wind had changed direction, the unusual silence that comes before something terrible. The avalanche hit at 3 in the afternoon. There was no warning, just a sound like the mountain splitting open, a roar that vibrated through stone and bone and air. The entire world turned white and violent. The monastery shook. Beams cracked. Then, silence. When the snow settled, they were trapped in darkness. The main door had vanished beneath 4 meters of compacted snow and ice. The secondary entrance, a narrow passage used for emergencies, was also gone under the slide. They tried the windows, all sealed. Every opening, every crack. Every breath of the outside world had been erased. 7 monks, 4 walls, and the temperature beginning to drop. Karma started digging at the main entrance with his bare hands, then with cooking tools, then with pieces of broken furniture. The snow was too dense, packed solid by the weight of the avalanche. After an hour of hard work, he'd cleared less than 30 centimeters before his makeshift shovel snapped in half. The first night, they conserved the butter lamps to save oxygen. They sat close together for warmth. Daji led them in breathing exercises, slow and measured, to keep panic from consuming what little air remained. By the second day, frost had begun forming on the interior walls. Their breath came shallow and labored. One of the younger monks, Jamyang, slipped into unconsciousness briefly before they managed to revive him. They tried digging again. The tools broke. Their hands bled. The snow might as well have been concrete. On the second night, the youngest monks began to weep quietly. Not from fear exactly, but from understanding. No one knew they were trapped here. No one would come looking until spring. They had maybe 2 more days of breathable air, 3 at most. Dorje sat with his back against the altar, eyes closed. He wasn't praying for rescue anymore. He was praying for peace, for acceptance. His mind drifted back to the cub, into those blue-gray eyes looking at him from the frozen branch, to the moment he'd reached out his hand through the storm, to her mother's golden gaze before she vanished into the wilderness. On the morning of the 3rd day, they heard something. Faint, rhythmic, like something scraping against the snow above them. Sonam thought it was ice shifting. Karma said it was just the wind. They were too weak to hope anymore. But Dorje opened his eyes because he recognized that sound. He'd heard it before, in a different context, in a different life. The sound of claws against stone, against ice, against the barrier between life and death. And the sound wasn't stopping. The scraping grew louder. Something heavy was moving against the packed snow. The other monks stared upward at the ceiling, their faces pale in the dying light of the last butter lamp. Dorje struggled to his feet, joints protesting, and moved toward the source of the sound. The vibration came through the cold stone wall. This wasn't ice shifting. This wasn't wind playing tricks. This was deliberate, purposeful. A low vocalization filtered through the layers of snow, muffled, distant but unmistakable to anyone who'd heard it before. The sound a snow leopard makes when calling to her young. Karma's voice was hoarse from dehydration when he spoke. That was impossible, he said, though his tone carried more hope than disbelief. The digging intensified. They could hear it clearly now, concentrated near the upper corner of the western wall where the roof met stone. Snow falling away in chunks. Something powerful working from above. Dorje closed his eyes and, for the first time in 3 days, allowed himself to believe. Hours passed. The sound never stopped, relentless, determined. The trapped monks, revived by the possibility of survival, began digging from their side. They tore cloth into strips to wrap their bleeding hands. They used broken prayer bowls as scoops. They worked in shifts, conserving energy, conserving air. Just before dusk, though they couldn't see the sun, they could feel the temperature change. A crack appeared in the ceiling. A thin line of gray light pierced the darkness. Fresh air rushed through the gap, cold and sharp and more precious than anything they'd ever breathed. The monks gasped, their lungs flooding with oxygen. Jamyang started crying. The gap widened. Snow fell through in chunks, and through the opening, backlit by the fading daylight, a shape appeared. Golden eyes looked down at them. The mother snow leopard stood at the edge of the hole she'd excavated, breath misting in the frigid air. Her paws were dark with packed snow. Her chest heaved from exertion. Dorji stared up at her. She stared back. Did she remember his face from that moment in the storm? Did she recognize the human who'd reached out his hand to her cub on that frozen branch? Who'd looked into those frightened eyes and chosen to save instead of abandon? Had she been watching the monastery, tracking the monks' routines, aware of their presence? Or was this simply her territory, her path, her hunting grounds? Had her digging instinct been triggered by sounds beneath the snow? He would never know. Maybe that was the point. The monks worked with renewed strength, widening the hole from below while the leopard continued digging from above. It took another 2 hours. The opening grew large enough for a man to fit through. Karma went first, the youngest and smallest. He pulled himself up and out onto the snow-covered roof, gasping at the sight of open sky. One by one, the others followed. Sonam, Jamyang, the rest. Dorje went last. When he emerged into the twilight, the cold hit him hard. But he was alive. They were all alive. The mother snow leopard stood 30 meters away on a ridge of packed snow. Beside her stood the cub. Not really a cub anymore. A juvenile now. Her spots had darkened. Her legs had lengthened. She'd grown. The young leopard watched the monks with those same blue-gray eyes. The mother watched with something that looked almost like acknowledgement. None of the monks spoke. When they stood on the ruined roof of their monastery, 7 men who'd been given back their lives, and watched as the 2 snow leopards turned away. They didn't run. They simply walked, their movements fluid and unhurried, until the darkness took them. Sonam started to speak, to say miracle or karma or divine intervention, but Dorje raised his hand. Some things don't need words. The monks descended to the village that week. The monastery was too damaged, the winter too dangerous. They would return in spring to rebuild. The story spread through the valley. Villagers asked questions, offered explanations. Some said it was karma. The monks' compassion returned 7-fold. Others said the leopard had been hunting marmots near the monastery and broke through by accident, that it was pure coincidence. Each person found the meaning they needed. Dorje said nothing. When asked directly, he only smiled and changed the subject. Spring came late that year. The snow held on through April, reluctant to release its grip. When the passes finally cleared in May, Dorje insisted on returning to the monastery. The younger monks protested. He was too old, the journey too difficult, the reconstruction work too demanding for a man of 80 years. He went anyway. On his first morning back, he walked the meditation path at dawn. The avalanche had scarred the landscape, leaving raw gouges in the mountainside where rock showed through. The path itself had been altered, stones displaced, familiar landmarks erased by winter's violence. Near the ancient pine tree where he'd found the cub, something caught his eye. Paw prints in the remaining snow. 2 sets, one large, one smaller but growing. Fresh, he may be a day old at most. Dorje knelt slowly, his knees cracking in the thin air. He placed his palm flat over the larger print, feeling the cold seep through his skin into the old bones of his hand. He didn't call out, didn't search the rocks for golden eyes. He just knelt there as the sun rose higher, warming the eastern face of the mountain. After a long while, he stood. His handprint remained in the snow next to hers, human and animal, side by side for a moment before the mountain wind would erase them both. He continued his walk, breath misting in the morning air. The silence around him was vast. Whether she'd remembered his face from that moment in the storm, whether gratitude lived in the heart of a wild creature, or only in the stories humans tell themselves. These weren't questions that needed answering. Idorje had learned something in 80 years. Sometimes the mystery is the gift. Sometimes not knowing is exactly how it should be. He walked on, the mountain holding its secrets, the snow leopards somewhere in the high places where humans rarely go. And that was enough.